As you mentioned, one of my early investments was in Oculus. The guys who I worked with at Scaleform, that company that I came back to work at, ended up being a few of the founders of Oculus. Essentially, I had a front row seat to that whole ride, and that was really exciting. And that gave me my start in venture, and that was 2014. So going on 10 years now. After Oculus got sold to Facebook, then I was capitalized to be able to not necessarily need a day job.
The VR Report podcast with David Gino.
Today on the VR Report, we're joined by Greg Castle. I met Greg a decade ago when he was already shaping the future as an early Oculus investor. His foresight extends beyond Oculus to over 90 startups, with 5 seed investments now surpassing over $1 billion in value, including Social Phenom, RecRoom, and Palmer Luckey's Anduril. Greg's journey is the story of vision meeting reality. Friends, here's Greg. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is David O from the VR Report. I have my special guest, Greg Castle. Greg's best known for being one of the early investors into Oculus. I've known Greg for a long time, but Greg's going to do a much better job of his intro. Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Greg Castle, and I am the managing partner at Anorak Ventures. We are a pre-seed and seed-focused fund that invests in companies being built around emerging technology. We do a lot in the areas of computer vision, artificial intelligence, robotics, AR, VR, and a bunch of other fun areas. We write checks between $250 and $750. We have been around since 2016, currently investing out of our second fund, soon to be third. And yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Greg. One thing, I've reviewed some of your past interviews, but there hasn't been a lot about your origin story and your background. Do you want to share where you grew up, and how you got into tech?
So I grew up in Long Island, New York, in a town called Jericho, and always grew up taking things apart, like most people with that kind of engineering interest to do. Playing video games, taking things apart, loved the sciences, got into business, mainly to make my father happy. At college, I went to University of Maryland and studied international business and marketing. And then after school, I got into finance, and did that for a bit in New York at a company called Bloomberg, the news organization. And they had a great program for sales, where they put you through a pretty rigorous training process and really taught you quite a bit about persistence and banging the phones and really valuable stuff when you're just coming out of school and you don't really have much knowledge about sales and really how it works. I think with sales, it's difficult to do unless you actually do it. It's difficult to kind of study it. Certainly there's all kinds of different areas around, the psychology of sales and things like that you can study, but, building up that thick skin, being able to deal with objections and no's and all of those different things really just come with time and experience. So I did that for a short period of time, but always really wanted to do my own thing. I started to have a couple of different side hustles that I worked on. Another part of my upbringing and things that I did was really being into health and wellness. So whether or not it was wrestling in high school or weightlifting or eating well, all of those things were a real interest to me. And kind of combining the two of wanting to do my own thing and having this passion for healthy eating, I decided to start something and felt that there was a big opportunity in the UK versus in the US. My father is British. I've spent a lot of time in London growing up, and it always seemed that trends in London were following a few years behind trends that were going on in the US. And in the early 2000s, Whole Foods was really starting to gain momentum, and the organic eating thing was really starting to gain momentum in the States. And the UK was a couple of years behind. Whole Foods was just starting to expand over there with a couple of acquisitions. And New York didn't really, I wasn't particularly tied there. I always had an adventurous spirit. And so I figured, let me go over to the UK where I had a couple of friends and I had some knowledge of the market. Let me start something up in healthy eating. So in 2004, I moved to the UK with the intention of starting a business and raised some capital from friends and family, partnered up with somebody locally there, kind of started what eventually became a concept very similar to Sweet Greens, fresh salads and juices and things like that. And we expanded that to about 6 locations around London. And my partner and myself had kind of a difference of opinion of how we want to run the business, coupled with a really difficult economic situation in 2008, 2009. And ultimately, I decided to move back to the States and join a very close friend of mine from college who was doing something that I found to be fascinating in the video game space. And so in 2010, I moved back to the States, became the head of marketing for a small video game technology company, and moved to Maryland, where the company was based. I spent all my time really understanding the video game market, the ecosystem of what it took to build a game, everything from, building models and designing levels to adding automation to working with a game engine to distribution, all of those different things. Basically spent a year traveling the world with the company, helping with a whole bunch of their marketing efforts, really understanding the customer. And a year later, that company was bought by Autodesk. And they were kind of adding, the company was called Scaleform. They were adding that to their suite of video game products. And I stayed over at Autodesk for a couple of years, helping them kind of build out their video game tool set and practice. It was a really interesting time to be in the video game market because there was this interest by all of the big game publishing studios in startups and in these smaller game studios. There was this kind of rise of the indies, and a couple of companies came out to help cater to that. And I shortly thereafter moved to San Francisco, started making some investments. As you mentioned, one of my early investments was in Oculus. The guys who I worked with at Scaleform, that company that I came back to work at, ended up being a few of the founders of Oculus. And essentially had a front row seat to that whole ride, and that was really exciting. And that gave me my start in venture, and that was, 2014. So going on 10 years now. After Oculus got sold to Facebook, then I was capitalized to be able to not necessarily need a day job for a little while and really figure out where my passions lie. And so I did that and started angel investing, and had some more early luck with a couple of good bets, and turned that into a career in venture. Started Anorak Fund 1 in 2016. Now I'm investing out of our second fund, and next year it'll be our third fund. So that's kind of my history in a nutshell, my origin story.
That's such a cool origin story because you work with Brandon and Nate at Scaleform.
And Michael, yeah.
And Michael. And these were also all the early founders of Oculus. Did you form a good, was it a personal relationship or was it more of a working relationship? How did that, what was the actual steps of where they said, hey, Greg, we're going to start this VR company. What do you think? What was the genesis of that?
It was very much a personal relationship. Like Brendan and I are he's like a brother to me. We're closest friends from college. And then after college, he went to do his own thing with Scaleform. At the time, it was called Sonic Fusion. That was actually the original name of the company. And I went to do my own thing, which was, work in New York City and in finance. And, we just stayed very close friends. When I moved over to London, he was still building his company. He'd come over to London because he had business there. We'd meet up in New York. We were just really tight friends. And then when I came over to work with him, I worked side by side with Nate and Michael, and that's when our friendship developed. And then we independently became good friends as well, Michael and I, and Nate and I. Um, and yeah, we all met Palmer together when he had just, duct taped together this prototype, send it to Carmack. There was this grainy video of Carmack playing around with the headset in the back rooms of CES or GDC, I don't remember, and being really excited about it. And then we all met Palmer for the first time together, and that was the meeting of that essentially started Oculus.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Oculus had actually started with Palmer Luckey. He was at USC. USC has a big immersive tech group, or at least a foundation of a lot of things that are happening in VR today. A lot of that came from the USC department with a lot of their early contracts and exploring virtual reality. And the early days of Oculus, Palmer Luckey had gotten John Carmack really excited to do this video. That video became super viral. Like, hey, this is going to be the future of gaming. But at the same time, those who've actually experienced Oculus at the time, like you had said, it was duct taped together. It was really just kind of this, Frankenstein of different components to actually have stereoscopic view of a HMD headset of what you see today. When you saw it for the first time, did you actually feel like in your bones, like this is going to change the world? Or was it just kind of like, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll work on this one. I always wanted to ask you that.
It was a pretty impactful experience when I first put the headset on. I think we had all tried headsets beforehand. Most people in the early 2010s had a headset on their face of some sort beforehand. Whether or not it was, a Nintendo add-on, I forgot what that device was called, but they had one, or
The Power Glove.
no, not the Power Glove. There was
the actual
there
headset.
was a
Yeah, it's
headset
the
that they had.
Virtual
Yeah,
Boy.
Virtual Boy. There you go.
Yeah.
Or it was something that that you tried on at an arcade, the big clunky ones. But it was never very compelling. It was very much, always in the past. You could very much tell that you were in an experience, right? There was latency problems. The ergonomics were terrible. It was, you were wearing this giant thing. And that was the first time where you kind of got lost a little bit. Like your brain got tricked a little bit into thinking that, wow, this is, I might actually be here. There was a sense of presence that was never there beforehand. So there was, it was a very impactful experience, which ultimately led me to,
That's super cool.
To wanting to invest. That coupled with, an exceptional team coming together around this was it.
Fantastic. So early investor into Oculus, I think what you're trying to say was a lot to do with like being there at the right time, obviously, but at the same time, you got a front row seats on how this industry had blossomed. And I'm sure some of your early investments, because Anorak Ventures, the name itself, did you base it off the player,
Mm-hmm.
Ready Player One? Okay, so that book didn't come out yet, but then I remember you launched Anorak Ventures. How did that
No, the book
timeline
was
work?
out. Yeah.
Okay, the book was out. Okay, cool. And so one of the characters, right, Anorak, and it's Anorak Ventures. Probably a lot has changed in terms of your early investments in those early days. How has your investment strategy evolved since then?
Um, so yeah, Ready Player One came out in 2011. and Anorak was formed in 2016. Um, so how has my investment changed? I think, in the early days, there's been this kind of pendulum shift between people who are excited about VR are generally investing in one of two things. They're either investing in content or they're investing in infrastructure. Infrastructure being both hardware and software. And the pendulum between what people are interested in has kind of swung back and forth over time. I think initially there were a lot of people who were excited about when the headset first came out. A lot of people were excited about content for a bit and developing games. And the other side of that was like, so I'm gonna say what people were excited about, and then I would say what what the intelligent actual approach was during that time. So in the early days, people were excited about content and creating the next Mario Brothers for VR, but in actual fact, there just weren't enough headsets that were going to be available for a very long while to make a Mario Brothers um, successful enough or interesting enough from a numbers perspective. So I think that a bunch of people thought then that actually the infrastructure, in order to create VR content, in order to make it a more enjoyable experience, in order to advance the technology, the picks and shovels would be a smarter place to invest. What nobody counted on in the early days is that there was really only going to be one player, and that player for oftentimes favors building themselves than they do making acquisitions. Facebook has certainly made acquisitions in the past, but like they invested billions of dollars to buy Oculus. They invest billions of dollars every year in getting the best people from all over the world to work on the problem. And so to not have those people actually build things themselves um, is a bit of a waste. They made plenty of acquisitions that made sense, but you really only had one buyer at that time who was like all in on VR. Um, so the picks and shovels approach was quite risky. The content was quite risky. Most investing in VR actually after Oculus for a couple of years was very risky. There aren't a lot of companies that are still around that were around and attracted venture capital right after and kind of call it 2014 to 2017, 18. Most of those companies didn't survive. Um, and then I would say that, we went from a place where people were kind of excited about infrastructure to a place where people were more excited about content. That's kind of, call it, for me at least, it's like 2019 and beyond was, I've become more excited about the content itself because the numbers are interesting enough. Um, and on the infrastructure side, again, there really is just one player there. So you're banking on one player adopting your technology. And you're really banking on either them adopting your technology and partnering with you or them acquiring you, which is a pretty risky. And to be honest, like it's not necessarily the technology now that is the gating factor. It's not like we don't have enough power in order to render good enough games that there just aren't enough headsets out there. Um, so for me at least, the infrastructure part of it is not nearly as interesting now. And I'm much more interested in content, both gaming and non-gaming.
That's fantastic. So I think early days infrastructure because there's not enough headsets, but now we have like 20 million plus headsets that are currently available just on the Quest side of things. And of course, Vive is still in the mix. We have players like Apple Vision Pro. Um, Also with Google and Samsung, with these new contingents, now you're saying, hey, look, it seems like I want to invest in content because there's actually enough headsets to actually support a return on investment. That's what you're
Yeah,
saying
but
now. That's how your
yeah, but
outlook has
I would
changed.
say it's not necessarily that there's other viable players. There's still really just one viable player. It's just that the numbers are big enough now that it's interesting. And hopefully, yeah, with some of the other players that are developing right now, some of the other options that will be out soon, Vision Pro, et cetera. Yeah, those numbers should continue to increase.
Cool. In terms of advice for new startups, what advice do you give them? You see pitches every day, and I recently became a scout, so I would like to know from you what is Greg's formula of checking those
I
boxes?
think being able to really clearly and concisely articulate what it is that you're building and why you're building it is really important. Like, I think being a founder, one of the most difficult things for being a founder when you're building the rocket ship as it's going up into space is to be able to shift perspective from being in the weeds 1 second and like being in the code and figuring out, did this wire come in from this investor? Is that bug fixed? Like really being down in there to being able to shift up to a 10,000-foot view and speak to, your grandmother or your 8-year-old about what it is that you're building it's really challenging. Those are like two very different mindsets, right? It's like 1 second you're going from like looking at the smallest, tiniest detail, and then the next of a car, let's say, right? You're looking at the smallest, most minute detail of the car, and then the next second you need to take 20 steps back and be like, this is a car. This will get me from point A to point B, and it's comfortable to ride in and it has a radio in it. It's just like such a different mindset to be able to switch back and forth into. But ultimately, you need to be able to switch back into that mindset of like, this is a car. Here's how you drive it when you're speaking to investors. Obviously, that's an exaggerated example, but and you don't need to step back and be like, this is a VR headset. You put it on your face. But you do need to be able to say, this is a VR training tool. EMT technicians are really grossly undertrained, and it's very difficult to train them. And there are uh, um, we only have 20% of the total EMTs that we need. This is a training tool that's going to accelerate training, um, lesson retention, memory retention, speed at which you can absorb information. It's been proven at this point that VR can help accelerate that. That is why we are building this tool. And that can be really challenging. And that's what I look for is like the ability to be able to switch out of being in the minutia of the company to being able to just clearly articulate what it is that you're doing without a whole bunch of BS and buzzwords and like all of those different things. Be able to answer the simple questions well about your business.
That's fantastic. And games, that's such a hit-driven business. You gave an example of enterprise, right? A solution that goes for non-gaming. But for games, it's different. Like I spent time at Ubisoft. It's very much, you want to do all the planning, but you can't tell what the market would want or want to play. And that has to do with a lot of in game development, a lot of play testing because you're trying to find the fun, and then you're trying to find the marketability. Who's that target audience that would buy this game? So, what lens do you look at while looking through that lens to evaluate
Yeah, it's a
games?
great
Because
point.
that's
Games
totally
is a
different.
very different proposition. With games, for me, I have to believe that it can be a billion-dollar franchise. Um, I think that there are some areas of gaming that are underserved. For example, um, the I think that the amount of friction it takes to get into most major IPs represents a substantial opportunity. Like the difficulty with which a noob could come in, download Counter Strike, download League of Legends, download like any of the big games and start playing it and ramp up in the game, um, is it's just there is so much friction there. But it is such a strong community. They've done such an amazing job with building such an amazing community there that um, there's a percentage of people who will go through the pain of getting their asses handed to them for weeks on end, of not knowing the lingo and feeling like a noob and all of that stuff for a while. But that percentage of people who will make it through, I think, is way lower than it should be. And I think that if you can create a game or an IP, I think Among Us is a great example. If you can create like a game or IP where the barrier to entry is super low and anybody could just play it, and maybe it's a web-based game, or they really pay attention to the onboarding and they really make it easy for you to hop in. Um, I think that there's a huge opportunity there to be a massive game, to be a Roblox, to be a Minecraft. Um, so that's what I look for in gaming I think so many people use gaming, the world and our brains and how we interact as humans with each other is changing so much. We're so in our phones, we're so in technology, the like the basic skills of just going up to people and you know, introducing yourself and shaking their hands and feeling comfortable in a group of people. All those skills are like atrophying. And I think that they're going to be replaced somewhat and they are being replaced somewhat with like skills online and creating community online. And that's okay to a degree. Um, but we need more, we need better solutions for that. And I think gaming is a nice social lubricant. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to lower the barrier of entry to get more people to build community online with games as the lubricant.
That's cool. I really like that thesis. Like, hey, we want to look for accessibility factor because we want to look for the next Among Us or the next Fall Guys. But Among Us, that's an interesting one because they're actually down to their last, rent check, I think, before they started getting viral. And, games like Roblox, which seem accessible today, were not accessible in the early days because it was difficult to onboard. You would actually have to actually know a little bit of programming to actually build something in Roblox, which wasn't super fun for those early gamers. So I think what you're saying is that it has the potential to have a big audience, so that's cool. But are you like specifically looking for specific genres? Like, yeah, moving in XR seems to be something that hits that sweet spot where you're actually moving with the technology. And you have his successes like all the Fit games, Fit XR, Beat Saber. Are you looking at through that lens as well? Like, what games would be exciting to Greg Castle if they're presented to you in their VR games?
I think games that have the widest possible appeal, which is challenging too, because you want to
Hmm.
be, well, maybe the widest possible appeal is not the way to put it. Maybe a better way to put it is um, games that have, yeah, more accessibility than most other games. Games that have a fun game mechanic, games that have a social element to it, and games that are easy to jump into. That is what I'm looking for in terms of like genre specific. A shooter versus a top-down strategy game versus a card game, whatever. I don't have, you know, if I play it and I like it, um, then it has to meet those other criteria for me to get excited about it.
What are you excited about with these new headsets? Do they offer any differentiating value proposition? You're like, wow, I can't wait that this will open up a whole new opportunity for investment. Or it's just like, hey, this just gives us more channels and more platforms to have specific content, make money. What's your point of view on that?
It has been predominantly a one horse race to date. Um, and that's not good for the consumer ultimately. The consumer ultimately wins when there's competition, right? Competition means that um, the competitors need to continuously raise the bar on the product, and there are opportunities for competitors to come in and fill gaps that are available. There only being Meta out there really as the only headset that is produced and sold in mass, they're they were kind of moving at their own speed, which was a fast speed from a technology standpoint, but they were focused on things that Mark and the leadership team felt that the company should be focused on. That is in line with their main business, which is advertising and social. They completely neglected for the longest time the enterprise space and all of the amazing use cases that were being underserved. And that represents a substantial opportunity. And there was nobody there to be able to fill in those gaps. There have been a couple of companies that have come in and that have tried to fill those gaps. But again, there just hasn't been anybody who's been well capitalized and who's done it well. So with Apple coming into the picture, with Google coming into the picture, Samsung, Qualcomm helping to kind of push the whole ecosystem forward. I am really, really excited for there to be some viable options there for consumers. I'm really excited for there to be companies that come in and really start to cater specifically to certain use cases. Like I'm really excited for, I'm really excited for that.
Yeah, I think this doesn't get talked about enough, where there are different entrants into the VR space that there always has been. Google has been in this game since the beginning of cardboard, right? Trying to make VR really accessible. It was made out of cardboard. But at the same time, uh, I don't think people are understanding like how do we position these different platforms different? Because I would love for a new incumbent to say, "Hey, we're really focusing on sensors to incorporate other items into VR." And HTC is really taking a stance on that, offering different sensors where you can bring in a crossbow or a golf so you can learn how to swing better. But at the same time, there's not many people diving into buying, some of the new offerings from Vive. Um, do you still think that it's going to be fragmented until like a player that's very consumer focused, like Apple, is going to bring some new variety in the game?
Sorry, can you
Yeah,
rephrase that question
yeah.
again?
Let me rephrase that. So, in terms of the different headsets in market, there hasn't been a lot of differentiation between all of them, except something like HTC Vive, which is really focusing on sensors and then bringing in real equipment or different assets into the VR experience, like learning how to golf or whatever. Do you think that there will be other value propositions that Apple will bring to the table, or Google and Samsung? Or do you think they're just going to be similar to like game consoles and they're just going to offer just another platform for their specific different audience?
Yeah, my hope is the former. My hope is that um, they do focus on different things, um, and I think Apple brings such a powerful ecosystem of both hardware and software to the table, um, that Meta can't touch. That is going to be, it just adds a totally different angle, right? Now, all of a sudden, the operating system that you live on through your phone, through your watch, through your MacBook is now the same exact operating system it is now fully compatible with the operating system that's on your face.
Mm.
Um, and I don't think that there has ever there is nobody who could do what Apple can do, just because they have so much of the rest of your data and are such a trusted brand. So being able to have access to everything in the headset is only going to be possible with an Apple device. So I think that that's gonna bring a whole new angle that's gonna be really exciting. But yes, I really do hope that others come in and that take a specific that are not mass. Um, like what Big Screen is doing, I think is amazing and great. And just focus on it.
Yeah, I really do love what Big Screen does as well. It basically mirrors your computer workstation so you can work at it in VR. I always wondered
Yeah, but but
why.
but the hardware that they're producing is amazing. I don't know if
Oh,
you're
right,
aware of.
the
Yeah,
hardware with their new glasses, the
yeah,
form factor, it looks super clean. Yeah, I
yeah,
totally forgot about that.
yep, yep,
Yeah,
yep. So they're coming at it from like we just want to provide you with the best experience, right? And so we want it to be light, we want it to be for real enthusiasts, and that's who we're catering to. We're not trying to be all things to all people. We're not trying to make a device that's completely accessible to everybody. We're trying to focus on a specific customer, and I think that's great. And I think more people should do that.
that that's that's a really good insight. In terms of investing, however, when doesn't that also differentiate your return on investment when, you're building something for a big screen and it just won't work now with Oculus? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that you make a great point. I look, there's a very specific model that venture follows, and the ease of scalability and the size of the market and the kind of revenue and profit profiles are very specific. Is that going to work for it does a startup that's building specialized hardware fit into that? I think it's difficult. Um, but you asked me what I was excited about as what I would invest in, and what I'm excited about aren't necessarily the same things.
Sure, that's totally fair. I've been really looking forward to the Quest 3 just because it opens up mixed reality and that opens up a whole new genre specifically around gaming. Um, and I really feel that mixed reality also is a precursor to developing AR when the optics and the form factor become a lot more accessible. What do you think about mixed reality as something that to invest in as a specific sector? Do you think it's just still a niche of VR, or do you look at it something different? Just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that the capabilities of mixed reality are interesting. Um, it is, you know, it is a feature. I don't necessarily think about it as like a whole new area. I think it's a feature that founders can potentially leverage to create really unique experiences. So yeah, I think it's exciting.
It's cool. And in terms of people pitching you, they're probably mostly pitching you, of course, for the Meta ecosystem. What are some do's and don'ts for Greg when they're pitching you? Blind, they're sending you a presentation. What are you looking for there? And what are the don'ts?
Um, it probably goes back to what I mentioned beforehand about being able to clearly articulate what it is that you're building and why you're building it and who you're building it for. I think that is a really important thing, and being able to clearly articulate that and be able to clearly articulate some very basics around the business. I look for that ability for founders to be able to, again, be in the minutia of the business one day and the next day be able to zoom out and talk to me high level about what it is that you're building and why you're building it. So that's an important do. Um, um, the question that I often ask myself when being pitched something, especially in VR, is if you haven't released it yet, if you don't have any data yet, why not? Um, I I like to see teams that are able to move fast and teams that are able to build on their own. Um, so if you're just coming with an idea, um, you had I, you had better have brought a game to market beforehand and really understand that motion and what you're about to get into. Because if not, I will expect that will have built something already and at least get it up on SideQuest so that I can, see what it is that I might be investing in, so that I can believe that you have a decent understanding of what it takes to build something, bring it to market, measure retention, measure all of the things that are important. So I would say, yeah, those are probably some of the do's and don'ts. And I'll give you two examples of those. Those are two companies that we invested in recently. One is a company called Trask Games, which brought out a game called Gods of Gravity. Two amazing developers who didn't go out, who I didn't speak to until they had Gods of Gravity out for quite some time and were measuring all the important metrics and had showed that they know what it takes in order to bring a game to market. And and have an idea for and are building some really exciting things that have a much broader appeal than Gods of Gravity, which is a really neat strategy game. But their vision is much bigger for the company. And then another example on the other end of that spectrum is a company that we recently invested in called Astrobeam, which is founded by somebody who was formerly the CTO and the CEO of the company that brought out Job Simulator, Alchemy Labs, which sold to Google. So he came to, when I spoke to him, he didn't have anything. He had an idea of what he wanted to do, et cetera. But like with him, I didn't need him to have something on SideQuest or something out already. He already had the credibility of what it took to be able to build something. So there, I'm okay to forego that you haven't, put something out there. I can go in knowing that you know what it takes to bring a game out. But the first time, those are green founders who had followed the path of, we're just going to build something, we're going to get it out there, we're going to bootstrap, and we're going to show that we have what it takes in order to bring out a good game that actually has some really good numbers behind it. One or the other, if you're pitching to me.
That's great. Devin's fantastic as the ex-CTO of Alchemy Labs. He was also a guest on the VR Report, so another
Oh, great.
shameless plug. If anyone guys want to check that
Great.
out, please do so.
Yeah, he's awesome.
I always ask this, Greg, like the metaverse, right? Like it's such a loaded word. What's your definition of the metaverse?
I believe that your digital identity is the metaverse. So I kind of think that if you have a persona on Instagram, you have a persona on Twitter, those are all relationships that are, or many of those relationships, and certainly not all, many of those relationships are digitally native, a specific like version of yourself that lives in a specific media channel. And so whether or not that is an avatar in World of Warcraft, a avatar on VR chat, a representation of yourself on Instagram or on Twitter, I kind of think that all of those things are their own versions of the metaverse. So for me, my definition of the metaverse is much wider. It's a representation of yourself on another platform other than reality, with which you invest significant amounts of time and or resources into.
I couldn't agree more. I used to say that exactly in terms of the metaverse, in terms of concept. We're already there.
Yeah.
We have these digital personas. We interact with other people digitally.
Yeah.
The only thing that's missing is actual spatial awareness, and you can only get that from a 3D screen.
Mm-hmm.
But conceptually, can't you get that from a 2D screen now? Isn't Roblox, for those people who live and breathe it, isn't that the metaverse for them?
Yep.
So yeah, there's going to be some disagreements in terms of the actual definition, but I'm glad we share in that common thread. Um, In terms of these pitches that you've been seeing, in my recent role as a scout, I've been seeing a lot of gaming products, and a lot of first-time founders, a lot of developers who may be senior engineers at different tech giant companies, and they got a Quest, and they're like, "Wow, I'm really excited about this. I'm also proficient in Unity and other game engines like Unreal, and I want to build something." And it's been very difficult for me to then go through all of this content to then give feedback, right? And to see if I'd refer them or not. Do you have like a faster way to efficiently review projects that you can share with me and the audience?
I'll go back to what I said beforehand. It's got to be one or the other. Either you've shipped beforehand and you've got a really strong track record and you're banking on that, or I want to see the numbers that you have out there. If it doesn't fit into either of those, then it's probably going to be a pass for me.
Understood. That's great advice. In terms of advice, what other advice do you have for startups trying to navigate today in XR?
Yeah, I think just get out there. Like get some content out there on side quests. There's the you can there's basically zero barriers to entry to be able to get things up. So get it out there and first convince yourself that you have something, and then come to investors and explain you've convinced why you're convinced that you have something. But yeah, my advice is just go.
Awesome. Predictions for short term and long term in XR.
Uh, I think that I think it's going to be a slow build. I'm not expecting anything wild to happen. I think when the Vision Pro comes out, when are they saying? Second half of next year?
Yep.
Yeah, so I think when that comes out, there's going to be a bump in interest and activity. But I'm expecting for the most part a slow build. The technology is still, even with the Vision Pro, and I haven't even put one on my, sorry, even with I haven't put either the Vision Pro or the Quest 3 on my face. I've held a Quest 3, but I still think that we have a bit of a ways to go before we get to ergonomics that are really, you know, comfortable and easy. Until we get there, there's still high friction to putting it on, and there's a lot of headsets out there already. So people going out and spending however much the new Quest is, or the Vision Pro even more. I just think it's going to be a slow build. So I think, as with most technology, overestimate impact. Its impact is overestimated in the short term and underestimated in the long term. But in, the next 5 to 10 years, every household is going to have at least a single headset in there that people are using for, to put on for work or for entertainment or for education. It'll just be another device in the house that everybody has, that different people in the house use depending on who needs it.
Yeah, similar to the advent of the mobile phone.
Hmm.
That's fantastic, Greg. Where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm gpcastle12 on Twitter. That's probably the best way to get in touch, to be honest. Our website is anorak.vc. There's a form there that you can fill in if you're looking for investment, and what I said today resonates with you. Not really too active on LinkedIn or any of the other sites.
Greg, thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure to be here.